everybody, and welcome to this Study Smart Q&A in collaboration with LMH and the Study Centre. I'm Eve. I'm a third year German and Spanish student who studies at LMH, and I'm going to be hosting this Q&A today. Over to you, Margaret. Would you like to introduce yourself, who you are, and what work the OSSC does?
Absolutely. Thanks, Eve, and thanks for hosting this today. And hello, everybody. Really looking forward to getting your questions and hearing all the things that are bothering you and the things that you are enjoying as well. So, yep, I'm Margaret Coombe. My subject, I suppose, my discipline is history, but for some years now, I've been teaching study skills to everybody, all disciplines and all areas. And what do I mean by study skills? Anything at all which impinges on your ability to get the best out of your course. So reading, writing, critical thinking, note-taking, all of that sort of thing. Whatever you think it is, we can probably handle it. Normally, the sessions that I offer are in two. One is group sessions where people are just invited to come along to a presupposed topic. And that can be, I don't know, transitioning for first years or how to deal with finals for finalists and so on. But the bulk of our work is one-to-one. So seeing individual students who come through the door and just want to chat about anything at all to do with their work. So that's what we do, and I'm very much looking forward to having your questions today.
Fantastic. So we have already got some pre-submitted questions that people have sent in prior, but as I said, while we're going through these pre-submitted questions, for those of you watching, please do feel free to put your questions in the chat. No question is a silly question. We'd love to hear from you, hear your input, and that's what we're here for, to go through those questions for you. So the first question is to do with motivation. Obviously, at the moment, we're coming up to a year of kind of on and off lockdowns. The pandemic has been going on for a year now. And I think a lot of people are definitely struggling with kind of keeping up that motivation because online learning, especially this last term, has been quite difficult. So how would you say that people can kind of keep their spirits up and keep up their motivation levels despite the not very favourable circumstances they're working in at the moment?
That's a very good question, Eve, and one that we've been dealing with a lot, as you might imagine. Certainly, as you say, this last term has been, I think, the hardest for everybody, dark, cold, and so on. The first thing to say is I think everybody suffers from lack of motivation at times. I think we probably all have, and that's a combination of factors. But what I would say, first of all, if you are suffering, and I think somebody said, mentioned burnout and somebody else talked about a slump, is I think the first thing to be aware of is this something which is actually study related, or is this something which is mental health related? And if it is, if you think it's something mental health related, then please don't hesitate to find somebody who can help you. Friends and family could be useful there, but sometimes, you know, friends and family are also overburdened, and it may be that the response is not quite what you might want. Often it's brilliant, but sometimes not. Do bear in mind that your tutors can help you, people like me can help you, online counselling can help, face-to-face counselling can help. So please do, you know, this is what we're going to say today is not going to be a substitute for any help that you need in that direction. And please don't feel too ashamed or too shy to seek it, because I think certainly if you read the newspapers at the moment, it's a big problem. Everyone's aware of it, and we're all here to help. So that's the very first thing. As I said, tutors, academics, welfare counselling, they're all available. But for us, study skills, I think there are a few tips that we can give you. The first thing I think is to make sure that you're varying your days. Now, I've been sitting here talking, I know Eve's been sitting in her room chatting, you're probably doing the same sort of thing. We're all basically in one room or one small space. And whereas normally you'd go out to lectures, you'd see people face to face, you'd go for meals, you'd go for coffees with people, you'd go out clubbing, whatever it may be. Now we're all confined to a small space. And it's very hard to get things changed around. So varying your day a little bit, doing something different whenever you can is a good idea. If, for example, I mean, it used to be that we all use social media for relaxation, but now we're using Zoom and Teams and everything else all day. So perhaps try to think of doing something else that's not always on a screen. If you are always on a screen, then try to separate out your space a little bit. So if you're working at your desk and you're using a computer, and the next thing you're going to do for a break is talk to your mates on Snapchat or whatever it may be, then perhaps just physically move to somewhere else so that you've got a space that is work, but a space that your body is telling you this is not work. So you're a bit more relaxed there. even in a very small room, moving from a chair to a bed and back again can actually give you that sort of space. And it's very, very worth doing. Also getting up, standing up, getting some stretches in or something like that once an hour at the very least, taking breaks. So many students I know who've said, well, I'm stuck here, I've got nothing else to do, so I'm working all day. Please don't do that. It's really not good for you. It's not good for anybody. So try to vary it. If there's something you've always wanted to do or learn how to do, even if you're really rubbish at it, I don't know, painting, drawing, sewing, woodwork, if you can, try doing something that's a little bit different, because otherwise, you know, we're all going to get very, very, very bored and quite demoralized and demotivated if you are spending a lot of time. Breaks, I mentioned just there, absolutely key. Really, really important that you take breaks. And so think about planning sometime into your week, sometime into every day, sometime into every hour or two, and take a break of some kind. Apart from anything else, it's good for you just to get away from a screen, look up occasionally, look a bit further away, because it's not good for your eyes to be looking at something that's about 10 or 15 inches away from your nose all the time. Try to do things like that. I think that can help. And obviously doing exercise does. Actually, during this lockdown, I found that online yoga has been very, very good. And there are lots of online things like that. When I say online yoga, if you have visions of this slightly elderly lady twisting into weird poses, I've not been using that, but there are some lovely ones online that just allow you to stretch at your desk or wake up in the morning and do some deep breathing or what have you. So do try to find something like that, perhaps. The other thing is having a to-do list is helpful, and I always recommend having that, but then not making yourself do it all. Spending a bit of time saying, is it really necessary? Do I have to do all of this? And I think all of us will write a long, long list that probably goes over pages, but you don't need to do them all. So have a look. Do I need to do that? Do I have to do that? Is something that something else can do? Something that someone else can do? Or is it something that I can put off till another time? And then you'll be left, I hope, with a few things you really, really must do. And I think categorizing them again into the big things, the things that are going to take time, writing an essay, maybe reading for an essay, and then look at things which are smaller tasks. I don't know, organizing your notes or making sure that you've got a list of the lectures you want to read or listen to or read notes of or look at slides or whatever it may be. And if you're feeling up to working, then fine, do the longer jobs. If you're not really feeling up to working, but you are under time pressure, then start doing a few of the little things. It's great to be able to tick off half a dozen small things that were bothering you at the end of a day. And you know, so chunking up the work like that into things that you really need to do and don't, and then the big things and the small things, and working out, getting to know yourself a bit better. You know, are you somebody who works well in the morning? Are you someone who works well in the evening? So trying to put the big tasks that you have to do at that time of day, try to put them in the morning, writing essays if you're good then. If you're not good at writing essays in the morning, why do it? You know, so really be sensible and think about how you work. Keeping your spirits up, again, it's really, really hard. But getting dressed in the morning, making sure you do get up instead of spending all day in your pajamas. I've seen some wonderful pajamas online, even during tutorials I've been given, and they give me a smile. But I think, again, they don't make a difference between being relaxed and not. So putting something bright on maybe might help you. Giving yourself some treats maybe. And also, you know, looking beyond. Actually, just before this started, we were chatting, Eve and I, about what we do afterwards and looking beyond the day, looking to things that are going to get better, because in the main they are, and thinking about what you will do when you can, what kinds of things you would like to do. In some cases, it means that people have really been reassessing their lives and their futures. And if that's you, then that's great. But if it's not you and everything seems a little bit, you know, you're not quite sure, then that's fine too. But just think about something nice that will come of all of this. What will you do? What were you looking forward most to doing? Who are you looking forward most to seeing? And that gives you a way of looking forward rather than just seeing every day. And then don't spend too long studying. I'm sure you'd expect a study skills tutor to say, work as hard as you can. But I'm not going to say that. Yes, work hard when you're working, but take time off. I've had some students saying they've done 14 or 16 hours in a day and it's really not happening. If I tried to do 14 or 16 hours in the day, it certainly wouldn't happen for me. Don't try to do that. It's really not necessary. Just focus on the work when you're doing it and then take a break. So work smart, work when you're working, rest when you're resting, and really make that division much more sharp than it ever has been in the past, because nobody's doing that for you. They're not saying lecture at 10, you've got to be there, tutorial at 2, you've got to be there. In the main, that's not happening. So, you have to do that yourself. But I hope those are helpful. But if anybody has any helpful hints that work for them, and if anybody has any ideas or certainly further questions that I haven't answered, please come back to me. I imagine Eve has some ideas about that as well, because you've kept going, haven't you, Eve, through all of this?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head. I wouldn't really have anything more to add, but I just would say that that division between work and study is so, so, so important. I went a while without having a desk really, and I thought, oh, it's not that important, but you really do notice a difference. And for me now, like coming and sitting at my desk is work time, and sitting on my bed or downstairs is relaxation time. And just really making sure that you're assigning times of the day for different things and prioritizing your mental well-being and time away from the screens, like
Yeah.
just much. So I completely agree with everything you said, and that leads us quite well onto our next question actually. As you said, it's really important to have times where you're not studying, but it's also really important to be making the most of the time that you are spending studying, so that you don't have to do it for any longer than you really need to. So how do you keep your mind focused on study, especially with the news that we're seeing at the moment? It can just feel like you can't escape from worries, uncertainties, and it can just, yeah, with motivation as well, it can just be really hard to focus.
It can. And if your motivation is low, focus is really tough. But focus, again, is really hard for all of us. Really, I can't add much to what I've already said. I think focus is something which you can only have in relatively short bursts. You can't focus for a long, long time. And I wouldn't suggest trying. But, so don't force yourself to keep focused on study. I think perhaps think about what has interested you in the past. If you're really not motivated, what are you doing now that interests you? Now, if you're still at school, maybe, and you really don't have much choice about what you do, there must still be something that you used to enjoy that maybe you're not enjoying now. And try to think what that was. Try to revitalize that spark. And so if the work you're doing this week or this term is not really something that's floating your boat exactly, it's not really exciting, think about what you do enjoy about it and why you enjoy it. But as I said, if you had plans before and you think, really, now that I'm stuck here with myself and my thoughts and my studying, that's not what I want to do. Well, if you're halfway through a university course, I certainly wouldn't suggest ditching it. But, you may have plans, you may think about what you would like to do in the future or how you would like to develop it, or even what papers or what subjects you want to do next. So think about all those things, take it as a time to reassess, and maybe that will reignite your focus. If I really now know that I want to go into, I don't know, banking, teaching, radio, TV, whatever it may be, try to start thinking about what I need to do, what I really need to do to be able to do that, and focus on that. And if something is left by the wayside, honestly, I'm telling you now from us, I don't know what other universities are doing, but here in Oxford, we're very, very aware of all the difficulties you're facing, and we're ready. We're ready to help you. We're ready to help you with that focus. We will be here the whole time. We're already putting things together for people who are coming, for outreach, for teaching, talking to schools, and all of that. Any questions you have, please get in touch if you want to know about what is needed for a job, what's needed for a career, what's needed for a course, and try to get that focus back a little bit. In a day, obviously, that's easy to say that, but it still doesn't get your work done. So I think, again, thinking about doing little bits, doing bite-sized things and treating yourself when you've done that, rather than seeing it as, I have got an essay to write. So perhaps start with going through the reading list, going through the things you have to read and seeing what is really useful and what's not. Certainly, if I were to give you one of my reading lists, there'd be at least half of it, which I say, it's there if you want it. You don't have to read everything. Please don't try. And people often find that very good. And I also say to students, if you don't know, sometimes that's the point of this. There are things that we don't know, and finding that out and working out where those boundaries are. So treat it as a bit of a sort of puzzle. A little bit like solving a mystery. What do we know? What don't we know? Why do we know it? Who knows it? And maybe that will help you as well, rather than just sort of slogging through the work. And when you come to reading or writing, and particularly writing, then there are phases. You know, write the introduction or write a paragraph and then just stand up and go away and treat yourself for having done that much. If you're having difficulties with it, tell somebody again. Tutors are often very, very, very happy, and I imagine teachers are too, to help you out with something, or just to say, look, if all you can do this week is the reading, or if all you can do is a plan, or if all you can do is half the paper, that's absolutely fine. Just do what you can. So, you know, times have changed, rules have changed a little bit, and hopefully everybody around you is going to be extremely kind and understanding. We certainly are. So, you know, do get, don't worry too much about that. But as I said, do interrogate yourself to find out if that lack of focus is something that is falling into mental ill health, and try to deal with that. Another thing to think about is a lot of what's been happening in the last few months is that students have been discovering that they may have a tiny bit of problem with certain things, and isolating what those certain things are and asking for help with them is really useful as well. I found quite a few students saying, well, you know, actually, I don't know how to read, or I don't know how to take notes, or I don't know how to write. What does an introduction look like? Or how do I answer this question when it's open-ended? Or how do I read a book when I haven't got much time? Ask those questions. People like me are here to help. I'm sure your tutors and teachers are as well. I think because there's not been that regular contact, you know, I would normally be in my college, I'd be walking across the quad, going to collect my mail, I'd go to the post room, I'd go to the photocopying room, I'd go and have lunch, I'd go and have coffee. People just bump into me in the corridor and would ask a quick question. That's not happening now. So you have to be a bit braver and just make that contact. And we'd be very, very happy to hear from you. So do use a different set of strategies, but certainly the ones we said about keeping yourself going and keeping yourself motivated work with focus as well, I think.
And talking about, obviously, you know, all of those tips are really, really useful for, you know, I think most people would probably say that they're definitely having sort of peaks and troughs, probably more troughs than peaks at the moment.
Yeah.
But generally they can, you know, can carry on forward and are getting through and have got through the last term at Oxford, for example, or the last term at school. But what sort of advice would you have for someone that, you know, when you really, really hit a wall, you really burn out and you've hit a complete slump, you just don't have any motivation, and, you know, it starts to last for quite a system. I'm sure we've all been there. I've definitely been there. What's your advice to sort of look after yourself in that period, but also to get back out of that slump without rushing yourself too much?
I think the key words there that you've mentioned are looking after yourself. And I think there's a lot of not looking after ourselves that's been going on. So I think that's really the key, is just going easy on yourself, a lot easier than maybe you're used to doing, and allowing yourself to feel what you're feeling. I think pushing at a slump like that, pushing at something that feels like burnout and just forcing yourself through is going to exhaust you even more. So if that's happening, you know, just allow it to happen. Work out though for yourself what you think you need, because if you just go to a tutor or a helper or a teacher and say, you know, I can't quite get going, or I'm not very motivated, they might try doing the sort of thing that I've just done and giving you lots of hints and tips which are not useful. So I think if you can spend a bit of time just working out what would help, and that's really one of the questions that I've been asking a lot recently is, okay, if I could wave a magic wand today, what would be the thing that you would want? Or, you know, if you had 3 wishes and now you're your fairy godmother, what would you ask for? And working out what that is before you go and ask for help will mean that you get really focused, really appropriate help. And if that thing is 2 weeks off, or a few days off, or not having to write any more essays this term, or whatever it may be, within reason that can be done. But if you don't know that's what you need, then I think the kind of advice you might get will be, oh, just try this, try that, try the other. And if you're not finding that helpful, you might then feel not able to ask again. You know, you've asked and the question's been answered. If you don't get the right answer, keep bothering. You know, I'm always happy to hear from somebody who says, well, I tried it and it didn't help. And I invite that as well. But it's quite difficult for somebody to work out how to advise you if you're just presenting with a sort of generic, I'm not getting on very well. So try to work out what could help and ask that question of yourself. If somebody could wave a magic wand today, what would that be? I think we'd all say, take coronavirus away. I'm sure we'd all say, lockdown over. I'm sure we'd all say, I want to see my friends. What I mean is something that is actually possible for someone to help with. And if there is something there, then you can present them with that, say, this is what I need, that's what I'd like you to do. And we can go off and do it. And certainly I've been doing that for students a lot this term. What would you like? What can I do? What do you need? And it ranges from students living in a small noisy flat and not knowing that they could be provided with noise cancelling headphones, to being given all sorts of equipment. I think I organised a comfy chair for somebody who was trying to work on the edge of a bed, and we managed to get her a chair. These are not major things, but they made a huge difference. So even if it is that, as Eve said at the start about the questions, nothing is too silly to ask.
I have absolutely no doubt that we'll come back to the motivation sides of things when we get into the public questions, questions from listeners. But moving on a little bit just to the other side of the actual revision techniques and how to actually maximize your time spent studying. One of the pre-submitted questions was asking, what is the best revision strategy for visual learners? And I would say, actually, before we sort of address that, it might be also worth talking about the different types of learners and how you can figure out what sort of learner you are, because I'm sure most people listening will know about this, but they might not know exactly how to figure that out.
Yeah, actually, I have developed a little sort of grid, and I may well put this online afterwards. And what that does, and there are several of these in different kinds of things available, but have a look for them to work out what kind of learner you are. And what my grid looks like is it's about 25 words in a grid, 5 by 5. And some of them are in bold, some are in uppercase, some are in lowercase, some are in colours, some have got a coloured background and so on. And all the words are carefully chosen so that they link in a particular way. So you can link them with themes of holidays or colours or places or whatever it may be. And there are a million different ways of linking these. And having a look at something like that and trying out what you can remember. And what I suggest is have a look at this sheet of words. You can't remember all 25 in a short space of time. Turn it over after about a minute and see how many you can remember. And this is not a memory test. What is it a test of is your kind of learning. And when you turn back over again, that's not just, okay, it's done. I've done 10 and, my mate's only done 9, so I must be better. That's not what this is about. What it's about is for you to find out what you have remembered. So did you, for example, remember the first 5 words at the top? Or did you remember all the 5 words that go down the left or the right or across the diagonal or something like that? Did you remember everything that was in colour? And how? Was it the ones with the coloured backgrounds, or was it the ones with the coloured names where the text was in colour? Or then did you link them, and how did you link them? What kind of words did you link, and how did your thinking go? And did your linking of one set then take you on to another set, and so on? So were you able to make that kind of link so that when you thought you'd thought of everything, you remembered that one of the words you had remembered actually linked to another word, and so on? And it's quite a fun little thing to do. I've done it a lot with students. And what it tells you is a bit about how you remember and a little bit about how you learn. Because if you're somebody who remembers things in colour, then learning things in colour is a way to go. And I know Eve's done at least one or maybe more YouTube videos on exactly that. If the way you learn is by using colours, then use colours. Have coloured notes, coloured tabs, coloured pens, all of that, and make sure that you're highlighting things as you go. If this is a fact, it's purple. If this is an opinion, it's yellow. If this is a bit of information I need to learn, it's red, whatever it may be, something like that. So you might have learned that you're a colour learner. And that's very visual as well. So, that will help you. If you're somebody who remembers things in sequence, so you've done all the first 5, top, bottom, sideways, or whatever it may be, then you're the kind of person who needs something to be much more structured. And so think about learning in a structured way. So maybe you're the kind of person who needs to think before you start working about exactly how you're going to do this, what you need to learn, and put it in some kind of order. And actually, I was speaking to one student this week who said it had been helpful having a chat because what she'd asked for was a series of tick boxes, and I'd given her a series of tick boxes. Now, normally I wouldn't do that with a student because it's not normally helpful. But what she needed was someone to say, you do this first, and then that next, and then that next, and so on. And if you're a learner like that, knowing that and planning it in that way is a good way to go. If you're the kind of person who's linked ideas, then that's the kind of learner you are. You link ideas. So one idea leads to another and leads to another and so on. So maybe you're somebody who should be thinking about mind mapping what you're doing instead of writing linear notes. And so that's the kind of thing that can tell you what kind of learner you are. And then the revision strategy, which goes with that, if you're a visual learner, what is it? Well, then it is, if you're the color person, making sure your notes are in color and you've worked out what those colors mean. I mean, there's no point in just spending ages with a yellow highlighter and then everything's in yellow. You need to have a series. But as I said, you know, one color for facts you have to learn, one color for the things which are opinions, one color for the things that you aren't really that sure about, actually. One thing for the offerings that somebody's given you, the facts and information they're giving. And you know, you could use as many colors you like for all the different things, and it's up to you to find those categories. And then it means that when you start revising, you've categorized these things. You know that this is what I have to learn, and it's in red, and it's in your brain in red, and so on. So that's that kind of visual learning. If you're somebody who learns something from a page, you need to know where on the page it is and where on the notes it is, then that's the kind of way you go through. It's systematic. So make sure that everything you write is systematically done. It may cause an extra bit of work for you because you'll probably need to make sure that your notes are not a kind of shorthand that you don't remember in future. You may have to write them out more fully than some other people do. And if that's the case, that's fine, do it. And as I said, if you're somebody who is making ideas, joining ideas together, then maybe think about mind mapping. And there are some really, really good tips online. There are some really good books about mind mapping which show you how to do it. It's not just a question of writing something like a spider and sort of doing lots of lines out from it. It's a bit more scientific than that, but it works really well to allow you to connect up your ideas. And that then will tell you how you're going to write something. And how it looks on the page is really interesting. Sometimes it looks as if a spider had crawled in an ink pot and it's all over the place. And then that will tell you very quickly, visually, that you haven't quite grasped this or you haven't got a handle on it. If it looks very neat and you've got a set of different points, all of which lead to a particular direction, then perhaps you've got it sorted. Or maybe you find that the complexity is actually something that helps you to see how complex this is and how the things are interrelated. And then you can write about that. So I think there are lots of different strategies. Visual learners fall into all sorts of different categories. And so do think about how you've organized things. And then when you learn from that. You see it, it stays in your mind as something visual. So that's really what I would suggest.
Fantastic. And the next question is about how to revise for essay-based subjects, because I suppose when it comes to sciences and things, it's a little bit easier in terms of knowing how to revise, I think, because I mean, not that the content's any easier, just that, you know, there's content and it's there, and you often have like a checklist of things that kind of you need to cover. Whereas when it comes to essay subjects, I mean, the essay question in the exam, it could usually be on anything. And I know I struggle with this as well, struggle with the sort of like open-endedness of it all, because you can never sit back and think, I've revised everything. So how would you approach revising essay-based subjects?
I think don't take on too much is the first thing. Everybody assumes they have to revise absolutely everything, because even if it's a topic about, if it's a question about a topic they know, they won't know every aspect of it. I think, you know, you cannot do that. So narrowing down what you're interested in is the first thing. And if therefore you are, for example, someone who is really interested in gender, no matter how it comes through in literature, in history, in poetry, in classics, in archaeology, how these things are shown. If that's the thing that you're really interested in, then bear in mind that's what your interest is. And there is nothing wrong in putting your ideas forward in that way. You might say then, what I'm going to revise is all the different aspects of these different topics which relate to the thing I'm interested in, such as gender, if you can. I mean, obviously different papers work in different ways and so on, but to find out what, first of all, interests you, and then look back at what you've done in the past and what you did really well, and think, okay, am I still interested in that? Is that something I would like to write about? And don't be scared to look at past papers as well. Get hold of as many as you possibly can and see what kind of questions have been asked and how many there were on different things. So now you will have a sort of bank of ideas, things that you're interested in, topics you're interested in, manners of expressing yourself that you're interested in, and what tends to come up in the past. And then see if you can marry those two things. Would it have been possible, had I written that paper, to write about my interests? Would it have been possible to say, well, that question could be relating to absolutely anything, but this essay, I'm going to write it from this point of view or that point of view. And that means being quite willing to let go a little bit of all the things that you think you have to do. And it comes back to the lists again. Do you really have to revise everything? The answer is no. Remember that whatever you're doing, whether you're on GCSEs, A-levels, degree, postgraduate degree, if you're writing an exam, it's a very, very short amount of time. And so you have to focus, because if you can't focus, you'll drive yourself mad trying to write the first essay and never get on to the second or third or subsequent ones. So do think about how you can do that. And when you're looking at the questions, usually what is asked is something which the examiners know you can do in the time. So they're not going to ask you a question which could fill a book or a volume or a bookshelf. They're going to ask something which you can do in the time you've got. But that means really focusing on the words in the question. So what did they ask about this? Did they ask you how something happened, or when it happened, or what happened? Or did they ask you to discuss something? Or did they ask you to what extent something obtained? And these all require different skills, different things. So do think about, first of all, what kind of questioning words. If they ask you how, then you're just describing something. If they ask you what, you're probably just describing something. And so what you need to revise for that, if that topic is always a how or a what question, all you need to know is how or what. You don't need to do anything else. But if you get something that says discuss, then that's when you can use these things. I'm interested in gender. So I'm going to say, this question could be about anything. It could be about race, it could be about gender, it could be about religion, it could be about history, it could be about whatever, astronomy. But I'm going to discuss gender because that answers this question really well. So think about how to do that. And always, I think people tend to revise towards a topic. They want democracy to come up. They want, I don't know, the geography of the UK to come up. They want Dickens to come up, and so on. They'd like something on Zola rather than something on Proust, for example. You can't know what will come up very much, but you can look at the questions and see not just the topic, which is interesting you, not just the questioning word, the how, the what, to what extent, and so on, but also there are often little words in there which people miss and lead them to either writing too much or actually getting off point. And the kind of little words I'm thinking about is or, and, ever, never, always, that kind of thing. Best is a good one. That pops up to so many questions. And that should give you an idea what exactly the examiner is asking you to do, and indeed what your tutor is asking you to do week on week, and allow you to narrow it down. So if you asked whether democracy, for example, is the best method of government, you can answer it in dozens of ways. You might be thrilled to see democracy come up, but the one way you shouldn't answer it is give me a potted history of democracy and democratic thinking for the last 2,000 years. What they want to know is it the best? And you can answer that in so many ways if you think about it. Is it the best for whom? That's one thing. So that's where your gender can come in again. Is democracy the best system for women, for men, for old people, for young people, for educated people, for uneducated people, for mothers, for fathers, for children? Who is it good for? Is it good for the government and not good for anybody else? For whom is something the best? And then, but if you don't want to go down that route, you can say, well, is it the best in terms of what? Is it the best government because, I don't know, it brings about peace or something like that? And then compare it with somewhere else. Compare it with another country or another system or whatever it may be. But you see how you can really narrow these things down. So look at the questions, look at the kind of things that come up, and work out what you're going to do if best comes up. What would you write about? And if you think about it, even if you haven't revised democracy, but you've revised oligarchy, well, you can just say, no, democracy isn't the best, oligarchy is better because, and so long as you don't go completely off track, you can actually do a small comparison with what you do know about democracy and write what you know best, which is oligarchy. So think about that. Keep an open mind rather than worrying too much about, have I done democracy? Have I done Zola? And instead think about whether you could actually answer the questions, the kind of questions set. If somebody asks you, does something always happen? What are the chances? Probably not. So you know they're probably asking you to argue, no, it doesn't always happen. And the same thing if the question has never in it, that kind of thing. If you're asked or, you don't have to write about everything. Is it this or that? Then acknowledge that it could be one or the other, but write about one. If you get a two-part question, which often is the case, show this and then have a discussion about it. You've only got half the time to write that, so you don't need an awful lot of information. I think be kind to yourselves. Don't overdo it, but do look. Don't be afraid to look at the past papers and the kind of questions and keep an open mind. And hopefully that will help you.
Fantastic. Sorry if you can hear the Hoover in the background. My family didn't get the memo that I was doing the Q&A. As per usual, people always like to start hoovering the second you go on a Zoom call. The last pre-submitted question we have is about memory and the importance of putting things into your long-term rather than your short-term memory. So how exactly can you get information to make that shift from your short-term to your long-term memory?
I think the key there, and many studies have shown this, is for most people, repetition is the way. Not trying to cram a lot at one time, but trying to do it little and often. And so I have a system for finalists, which is actually online for those who can access Oxford systems. And it involves just going back over things several times. But if you're trying to learn a language, for example, excuse me, if you're trying to learn a language or you're trying to learn some terminology for biology, or if you're trying to learn formulae for maths or economics or something like that, then just trying to cram it the night before may work. I mean, it does work for many people, cram the night before and it's all gone by midday. But if you want to hold it, if this is something that you're actually going to need to retain, then a little bit. So in your day, when you're planning, if you have a lot of vocabulary to learn, don't try to learn the whole book, but give yourself 5 or 6 words today, and 5 or 6 words tomorrow, or a bit of a formula today and a bit of a formula tomorrow. And then try, if you can, to practice it for a little bit. So if you've learned 5 words of vocabulary, just try writing 2 or 3 sentences in which those words might appear, and it will eventually stick. I'm certainly not somebody who remembers things very well, and I found that works for me. There are very few people for whom that doesn't work, that kind of repetition, and the people for whom it doesn't work tend to be the very visual learners, the ones who have the photographic memory, or the ones who need to see something on a page. And then those are the people I would go back and say, then start mind mapping it instead. Start doing something like that so that what you're visualizing is a page. But otherwise, I think keeping it in your memory just means it's like anything else. If you don't use it, you lose it. And do a little bit if you can each day, and that will work. So start as soon as you can with revision, but not heavy loads. People will ask you, how much revision have you done? It's not a competition. A little bit each day of everything that you have to do, and you'd be surprised how much you find will stick when the moment comes.
Great. That goes for our pre-submitted questions. We've got another 18. No, wait, I can't do maths. 18 minutes left. Yeah, sorry. There's a reason that I do humanities and not maths. So I'm going to try and go through some of the questions. Probably won't be able to get through all of them, but we'll try and get through as many as we can. So the first question is from Liliana. Thank you so much for submitting a question. And she was asking about the best way to take notes during a lecture. And I suppose because of the fact that lectures are now online, I think a lot of people are struggling in that a lecture that's 1 hour long is taking them like 2-3 hours to get through. So how would you suggest that people can make effective notes without it taking forever and writing down everything they're saying?
It is tough, but never, ever, ever in a lecture should you be writing down everything, certainly not. And so I think depends what subject you're doing, really. So for example, if you're doing engineering, the lectures are intended to be part of the course. If you don't go to the lecture, then the worksheet that's given out at the end of that is something you can't do because you've just learned how to do it. Maths is very similar, sciences are very similar. but often with them, you will get some kind of sheet that goes with it, some kind of information sheet. If you haven't got that, ask for it. That's the first thing, because you do need to retain it. So there's no point in you writing out again somebody's slides or something like that. Often it's just an oversight on the part of the tutor or the lecturer. And if you ask for something like that, you'll get it. And then just annotate those as they're going through. If you do that, hopefully you will find, and this is mostly, as I said, for sciences, if you do that, you'll find the bits that you did and you didn't understand, and that will give you a way of asking again. So just focusing on really having the documents in front of you if you possibly can, or having them up on your screen, and then as somebody's talking to them, just making your own notes. Yeah, that's clear, that's not clear, I don't know that, help, that sort of thing. And then working out what you need to ask and making sure that you ask it. And then finding the worksheet and trying to go through it. With lectures in things like humanities, often they may well not be telling you anything that you can't find easily somewhere else. So writing down all the facts, all the information, again, is a bit of a waste. What humanities lectures are often intended for is to give you something in a compact fashion, which gives you some ideas. And the kind of ideas it might give you will be of a book that you've not read, or an author that you've never heard of, or something like that, which just widens your knowledge. Often I've sat through lectures done by colleagues, and the thing I've learned from it is an approach. They've not told me any information that I didn't already have, but they've shown me a way of approaching it, which is really interesting. So I think, again, seeing lectures as something where you just have to sit there with your head down scribbling, it doesn't apply in a lecture room. It really doesn't and shouldn't. You know, when you see people literally touch typing away like that, there's no point, absolutely no point. And now they're online, certainly there is no point. But looking to see why this lecture was given and what the lecturer was trying to tell you. And I do think for humanities in particular, it's often, that's an interesting way of doing it. I wouldn't have thought of doing it that way. Or there's a bit of information I need to follow up. So I think being a bit more, you know, the theme that's coming through here is be a bit more relaxed, be a bit kinder to yourself. If it's something that you do think you already know most of, then obviously the fact that it's online means you can go through at even faster speed and get an hour's lecture in half an hour. But if it's taking you a couple of hours, do look at what you're doing. And if you're trying to spend a lot of time over something, always, I mean, there'll be the odd lecture that you think, I didn't understand that, you may want to go through it again. But if that's happening always, then maybe you're just trying to write too much, understand too much, and they're meant to be an adjunct to, an add-on to the reading you're doing, the writing you're doing, the other things that you're finding out. They're not meant to be the sole part of your day. So do try, please, not to write down everything and to be choosy about what you take from each lecture.
The next question is from Ivana, and she asks if you have any tips for extreme procrastinators, which I'm sure quite a lot of people will be able to relate.
Yes, interesting. It depends how extreme that is. And again, if it really is extreme, it's probably more of a mental block than anything that study skills can help with. And so I think you do need to take action and work out why you're doing that. Often it's fear. I just don't think I'll do it well enough. It's that perfectionism. And I think if that's you, and it's certainly been growing and growing and growing while people are in a little cell and not really able to communicate with other people very well, try to take yourself in hand. Actually, you don't have to be perfect. Nothing can be, and nobody expects it. So I think trying to do something to the best of your ability and allowing yourself to know that's the best I can do. I've done it, you know, I've worked on it, and it may some weeks not be particularly good, and some weeks it'll be really good. And I found some students who are surprising themselves by saying, I tried this week and I worked really, really hard and I got a rotten mark. And last week I did almost no work and I got a top mark. Maybe that's telling you something, that actually the weeks when you're more relaxed, when you take less time and just get it done, might be better. So, but if you can't, I mean, if you really, really are blocked, then I think it's something more serious than study skills. So do have a word with someone about that. But work out what you're scared of, what it is. And it's more often than not, it's perfectionism. It won't be good enough, so I won't do it. But good enough is good enough. And it's often a much lower standard than you think. And you're not doing yourselves any favors actually by trying always to be perfect. We just can't. I can't, I'm sure Eve can't, lots of people can't. but it's recognizing that in yourself and working out what is good enough is the key to it.
The next question is particularly relevant this year, again, because of the pandemic. Most exams are online, if not all of them, that can be online. And James has asked, how would you recommend studying most effectively for an open book exam? Because that really does change the dynamic, especially in Oxford, where, I mean, my exams have always been, the onus has been on, you learn what you need to say.
Yeah.
So I don't quite know how to approach an open book exam. I think I'd actually be quite intimidated by that prospect. So
I think a lot of people are intimidated by it because it is a very different animal, as you say. It's the same sort of exam paper and the same thing has to be the end result, but getting to that end result is a lot different. There are a couple of things I would suggest. It's all about preparation, really. So make sure that you know everything there is to know about what the exam format will be. What will you be expected to do? What kind of papers will be online and which ones won't? What will the format be? If your tutors haven't told you or your teachers haven't told you, then find out, ask that question. Will it be the same as it always is, or will it be different? And the kind of variety that we're seeing here in Oxford at the moment is some papers are being given days to be completed. Some are being given hours, like 8 hours for what would normally be a 3-hour paper. In some cases, papers are being chunked together. So half of one and half of the other are being sort of put together in one. So you have to do half the work for each one rather than the usual amount. Some are the same as they ever were, but they're just online. And so work out what is involved and how you're going to do it physically. And the kind of questions you might have that will worry you is, what happens if it's online and the internet drops out at home? That sort of thing. Will it all be saved? I think the answer is mostly the systems are such that whenever the internet drops out, it will be saved. So you should be fine. But if it's a paper for which you're allowed, let's say, 4 hours, you would normally have 3, and the internet drops out for 2 of those hours and you never get back online, then make sure that instantly you make sure somebody knows. So all those worries should be not on your shoulders, they should be on somebody else's. So ask what the system is for that. If the internet goes completely, what do I do? If it goes for a short space of time, what do I do? If I can't upload the documents, what do I do? If I can't download the documents, what do I do? Find out who's there to help. And in most cases, certainly here, I know that there are going to be phone numbers sent out and email addresses and all of that. An email address is not helpful if you haven't got the internet, so make sure you've got the phone number as well, and just make sure that you know whom to ring. And we'll all be standing by in the way that we normally are, but by phone instead. So we're expecting our phones to ring, tell us what's going on, and we'll see if we can solve it. So, again, it's all about communication as well. Do tell us what's happening. Don't just sit there and weep. And then prep in advance and make sure the system, the nuts and bolts, I suppose, are there. And make sure that you know whether you need to handwrite it, whether you need to type it. I think certainly Oxford students are being given a choice about that. If you're typing, it's a completely different animal than if you're handwriting. Oxford exams are normally all handwritten, and that's what people are used to. So being able to type for some will be an advantage, and for others will be a distinct disadvantage. So find out if you can handwrite and what is the way of doing that, if that's what you're best at. You will have been typing for a long time, and now suddenly you may be faced with handwriting. So practice a bit. If you think you're going to do all these things handwritten because your typing is still a bit like mine, you can manage a little bit, but not very fast. And 3 hours goes very quickly, as you know. Then make sure that you practice a bit every day so that you don't get, your hand doesn't basically seize up halfway through the exam. And then open book sounds great because you can have a pile of books and notes on your desk as you're working. But of course, it's still only 3 or 4 hours. Those who have 8 hours, those who have 5 days are in a different position. They can consult things. Because of that, because you can consult things, the questions are going to be slightly different because, if everybody can find a particular fact, you won't be getting brownie points for knowing what happened in what year or so on. So the questions will be different. Do expect that. And don't expect to be able to find an answer. Go into the exam with a brain that's working and something that can make you think, because that's the kind of thing that will be asked. If everybody has the knowledge, as Eve was saying, you normally learn things and you go in, and to a certain extent is a test of memory. It no longer is if it's online. But what it is a test of whether you can find what you need. So in looking at your notes, make sure that whatever you've written is something that's easily accessible. And I suggest that if there are things that you know you will need, like the name of a book, the name of an author, a particular formula, a date, whatever it may be, a bit of a quote maybe from a book that you have to quote from if you're doing a literary exam, some vocabulary that you know is going to be tested, then try to make sure that's on a separate sort of leading sheet at the front of your file for each paper, so that you don't have to flick through and think, now where did I put it? Which lecture was it? What week was it that I did that? You've got them all up front. So you have a sheet, if you like, of information. You extract that, start extracting that now. And for each paper then, each exam you're going to do, you would hopefully have a front sheet of all those things. So you don't have to work out where in your notes it might be. It's there in front of you and just incorporate it. Do also bear in mind, if you're typing and you're used to typing your essays, that just lifting something out of an essay you've already done and putting it into a new one is probably not going to work. Unless the question is identical, there will be something different about it which requires a different kind of answer. So just thinking, oh, this is really easy because all I do is, you know, if that topic comes up, then I'll just uplift that essay that I did before and put it in. Do make sure that you read the question and make sure that the essay you did answers the question that they're asking you. It often won't, and that won't work terribly well. But it does mean, of course, that organizing notes on screen as well, if that's the way you're working because you're typing, would be a good thing to do. So you might have these things and you don't even have to type them in, you just lift them from the notes that you've got on screen into what you're doing. Because of this, and because that's easily possible, a lot of exams, certainly in Oxford at the moment and probably elsewhere, are setting word limits, and they won't mark over and above a certain number of words in an essay. So just because you've got all that information to hand, you're not going to be allowed then to type, you know, you may have done a typing course, you may be able to do, I don't know, 80 words a minute or something. They're not going to let you go on for 10 pages and mark it all. You will still be expected to write an essay which makes your points succinctly and well. So do make sure that you're not going into that sort of overdrive where just because you can type, you think you can put everything in. So prepare for that as well. And especially if there's a word limit now, when previously there wasn't, but it was just limited by how much you could write in the time, and now it's typing, then do find out if there's a word limit, because they are going to be very strict, I think, on that, where there's a word limit set, and they tend to be somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 words for an essay, then anything over that will not be marked. So you might have got your best piece in page 3 and it just won't be seen. So do check all those things. But you're right, it's a different animal. And if you think you need help with it, a lot of places are doing mocks that you can take. They're getting used to the system and so on. So do take time to do those. I know it feels like a waste of time doing just logging on and seeing if you can and how it works, but I think it's worth reading all of that.
Definitely. I think we've probably got time for maybe 2 more questions. So the next question is a very important one, actually, from Emma, and it's something that I think a lot of Oxford humanities students especially is a big shock to the system when they get here, and it's the very, very long reading lists that you get each week. So she asks, how do you tackle those? And yeah, this is a very important question, because I remember my first reading list, I thought, do I need to read all of this? Oh my goodness. And I did actually spend the whole week trying to read it all, and I very quickly learned that that's not very sustainable.
No, not at all sustainable. And certainly, as I hinted earlier, my reading lists are quite long. I think the thing to do is, as with the exam tests that you're doing, just look at what the question is asking you to do. Because certainly with my reading lists and many others, what they're aiming to do is allow you to go in whatever direction you're interested in. So for example, for my subject history, I will have things about art history and military history and religious history and gender history and so on. No, of course, you're not expected to read them all. But ask your tutors if there's a core book on that list. Some, and I do this, will sort of put an asterisk alongside the things that we really think you should read, and others will just give you a list. So just ask, is there anything here that I especially should read? And then bear in mind that they're often very long, because there aren't many copies of these books physically available. Now, again, the pandemic means that lots more subscriptions to ebooks have been made, and they are more readily available in multiple copies. But when we're back to normal, then if it's just 3 copies of a book in one library, once 3 people have taken them out, you can't get access to it. We know that, and that's why you might get 20 or even more books, because if you can't find one, you'll find another. So, don't worry, you don't have to read them all. but try to find one that is your, gives you a starting point, I suppose. Think about the question, think about what it's asking you to do, and then make a sort of note about what you think might be useful to find and start looking. And I also recommend starting with the books that you're reading. Just read the introduction and conclusion to start with and see if it's likely to have anything useful in it. Look at the index and see if it's got something in there that you might look at, and cherry pick to start with. And you'll probably end up with maybe 2 or 3 that you really feel you should read through. And the others will just be giving you a slice of what you need to do. So don't worry about them too much. And if you really find yourself lost and don't know what you're looking for, there's a lovely series of books which I recommend, and I think they're in many libraries now, called The Short Introduction to whatever it may be. It started out with about half a dozen, which were mostly on history topics, and now there's huge numbers of them. And it's a great thing to look at. I've got a series of them on my shelves, and I make no apology for that. They're really good just to give you an overview. They're about 100 pages long, and so read something like that. Try not, however, to go for potted things on Wikipedia. They're often misleading.
Great. Okay. So we've had so many questions. I'm sorry that we won't be able to answer all of them, but I think this is a really good question to end on, and it's how to get over perfectionism when revising. I find myself getting irrationally frustrated and starting again if I don't write in a straight line, or like, people that sort of make excuses in their head, like, oh, I've done this wrong and hence I've got to start again. And people who actually find that wanting to do everything perfectly is hindering their revision, paradoxically.
It does. I think perfectionism is one of the biggest single blocks. It's really hard. Again, there are lots of tips and hints online. I know for Oxford Counselling, for example, has a whole series of those. Find something that works for you. But if you're constantly saying, I've done that wrong, I need to redo it, or I can't get started, or I don't know how to do this, then find out whether it's something that you actually haven't been told and you need some help with, because if you do, then you need to go and ask. If it's something that is really just blocking and you've been told it doesn't matter, do your best, or what have you, and you're still finding yourself up against that, then I think trying to work out what you're worried about. And this sort of fringes a little bit on the sort of things that counsellors do. What are you worried about? What do you think is the worst thing that can happen if this essay isn't so good, or if that question is not answered? And generally, it is something to do about how you will feel. It's not the punishment you're going to get. You're not going to be shamed into anything. It will just be a week when you get a not particularly good mark. And that's mostly fine. Tutors don't worry too much about that unless it's consistently bad. But I think thinking about your own self-esteem, what does this say to me? And I always tell people, and I will repeat it again here, this is your work. It's not you. And the two things are very, very separate. They're separate now. They're separate when you get a job. It's distinct from you. Your work may not be very good, but you're fine. Actually, you're great as you are. We love you to bits. I love all my students. And, you're a person in your own right. The work is just a part of you. It should not be defining you. And if it does, just try to change that for yourself. Because if you find your work is defining you, it's a method of thinking that will carry itself into your working life, your family life in future. And it's a misthinking. And I would encourage you to try not to do that. Even if your work is awful, you have a lot of worth as a person, and that's just great. So, celebrate that. And if the work is continually awful, then get some help with it. But please don't punish yourself for being not as good as you think you should be, because actually you're fine. Actually, most of my students are really, really lovely, bright, intelligent, and are going to do really, really well. But that worry is holding them up. And it's so distressing to see. So please don't do that to yourselves.
I think that's a really, really lovely note to end on, actually, and a really good message to take away from this session. Thank you so much to everyone for submitting your questions and for staying and listening. We really hope that it's been useful. And above all, thank you to Margaret for all of your amazing tips and tricks that you've shared. Where can people find you after this? If they want to ask you any questions, where can they find you?
If they want to ask any questions, the best place to go is to Oxford Study Skills Centre. It's got a website, which is www.oxfordstudyskillscentre, all one word, all lowercase, .co.uk. and there's information on there. It's an outward facing website. For those who are Oxford students, it also has links to lots more tips and hints and things on our Canvas website, for those of you who know what that is. But do look there in the first instance. And if you send an email and you have some questions and we can answer them, then we will.